I'm underneath the Dodge Charger, looking at the transmission pan. Needing to change the fluid, but I'm going to go ahead and pull the pan and change out the filter as well while I'm under here. According to the manual, as well as the basic idea behind doing transmissions, is you unbolt the retaining bolts starting at one side. On the Charger, it looks like it's going to be easier to do the front first, then the sides, and then just loosen the rear bolts a little bit. What'll happen is the front of the pan will drop down and fluid will start running out, so you need to have your drain pan ready to catch it. And it's quite a messy process. I mean, you see you basically got the entirety of the drain pan at some point that's going to be leaking fluid down, as opposed to like when you're changing oil or whatever and you have a drain plug. I did buy a drain plug, and if it looks like there's clearance on this pan, I'm going to install one. Just one, so you can see how that works, and two, for future changes it's easier just to drain fluid and kind of periodically change fluid. I mean, obviously you have to change the filter eventually, so eventually you do have to drop the pan, but if you can avoid dropping the pan somewhat regularly, it's a lot less messy. Along those same lines, you're going to see right there and right there, those are transmission cooler lines. If you're wanting to do a transmission fluid flush, which would be necessary to get out all of the fluid, in other words, dropping the pan is going to get, you know, probably a couple quarts of fluid out, but that's not a complete change. There's still going to be quite a bit in the vehicle. But if you can trace those transmission lines, and basically one of them is coming out of the transmission and one is going back in. My guess is the lower one is going out and the upper one is going in, but that's just a guess based on common sense and logic. Anyway, you want to find the line that comes out of the transmission and at a convenient point disconnect it. This may be the most convenient place, but I'm hoping that somewhere up by the cooler is more convenient. And then basically you run the vehicle, which will pump the old fluid down to the cooler line, and where you've disconnected it, it'll go into your drain receptacle. Simultaneous while you're doing that, ideally you'll be pouring new fluid back into the opposite line. Or if you can't figure out a way to do that, you can always just pour it down the dipstick tube, which will fill. And then you just watch for the color of the fluid to change. So, like I've checked, this fluid is kind of a brown color. New fluid is a bright red. So I know the fluid's bad and needs to be changed out. So like I said, with any luck, I will drop this pan, change out the filter, put the pan back on, be able to disconnect one of these lines, run the engine and pump out the dirty fluid while I pour in new fluid. Once the new fluid is coming out of the line that I've got disconnected, then I'll stop the engine, reconnect the line, top off the transmission fluid. So it's a messy and long process, and I've been putting this off. Just don't enjoy being underneath the car like this, but gotta do it. And there's those transmission lines. They are continuing up to there. That does not look like an easy place to disconnect them, so I'm gonna have to pop the hood and see if there's a better place, because I really don't want to have to disconnect from there, and I definitely don't want to have to connect from the transmission itself. Alright, there's where the transmission cooler could be disconnected. So you see I basically just undid these. There's two, obviously one on top, one on bottom. I also removed, there's a mounting bolt It's a 1/2 inch bolt, but it's about 6 inches long, so it's kind of weird. You have to get in there with the socket extension at first and then remove the extension to get the bolt out. But that's what holds this mounting bracket up there, so it allows you to drop this down, which hopefully the fluid will leak out. I'll tell you, I'm tempted to start the engine and see how much runs out of here. It's not going to come out of here, obviously, because this is coming back from the cooler, so whatever's in the cooler is dripping out of here, but that is where, if I start the engine, it's going to come out of. The problem, obviously, is if you run the engine until the fluid runs out, you're going to damage your transmission, so it's kind of a risky proposition. I opted to remove the cross member here. There's 4 13mm or 1/2 inch bolts on the sides, and then the 2 in the middle are about 5/8 inch. The reason I did that is because although you could probably access the pan without removing it, you're going to have special tools to do so. There are T30 bolts that hold the pan on, and the tools I had to remove this cross member in order to reach. I also put a jack on the transmission because as I was unbolting the cross member, I noticed the transmission and drive shaft were moving a little bit, and I didn't want them falling on my face. So a little extra work, but it ultimately made the job easier to do. Alright, you see it dripping out. I took down the cross member. Before I did, I put the jack there to hold the transmission. I will tell you, I was really shocked. I mean, I barely turned the back ones and fluid started coming out. You know, normally you crack quite a few of them before any kind of fluid comes out, so made a little bit of a mess here because I was not expecting it to come out so quickly, but it is draining. I haven't even loosened half of the bolts, and one of them I removed now, but it was already coming out this fast before I removed it. The other 2 are probably 1 to 2 turns loosened. So that gives you an idea. Basically, get your drain pan ready, because as soon as you start cracking these open, it's going to come out. My intention was to turn the back ones a couple turns, remove the front 4, and let it come out the front. But like I said, plans change when fluid starts pouring down on you. So, alright, I got 5 bolts out, and letting the fluid drip as long as I can, because once you totally remove the pan, then obviously all the drips are going to come from that large area rather than just coming out of the bottom of the pan there. It's a pretty messy job. No matter how careful you are, you're going to spill some. So it's good to have something down to catch the drips. Once that stops dripping, take the pan totally off, change the filter, and put the new gasket on, put the pan back on, and we'll fill it up. Alright, we gotta get the pan clean. There's a magnet here, and the magnet is designed to catch any metal shavings that come out of the transmission. One, you don't want to lose that magnet. Number 2, you need to make sure it's clean, get all that metal out of there so that it can continue to do its job. So that looks pretty clean. Dodge gasket is unique in that it kind of fits over the edge. transmission gaskets I've done before, there's kind of a flat edge and it just sits on it and then the bolts go through. So this one fits over it, and there's the 6 retaining bolts that have like a little tab on them that presses against here. So my guess is this is a superior design in that it wraps around the edge and it should be very secure and resistant to leaking. I did debate in my head whether I should put some RTV kind of along some of the corners to kind of hold this gasket in place, but since it didn't have RTV on it from the factory, I'm not going to put RTV on it because there's possibly a reason that they didn't put it from the factory, and it could be that any minor variation in the thickness there would create a leak. So I'm going to do it just the way they had it. So now I'm going to put this back under the car, bolt it on. It calls for 70 inch-pounds of torque on the bolts. Unfortunately, since it's a T30 size, I don't have a tool that I can put on a torque wrench to do that, so I'm going to have to hand tighten this to the best of my ability equally, roughly 6 foot-pounds or 70 inch-pounds. Yeah, I promised you that I'd show you how to put in a drain plug. So what you want to do, first of all, because you're going to have ½ inch or so sticking up on the inside, you need to put it where it's not going to hit something. So for example, over here it's going to hit. So I'm going to put it in the back, somewhere over here, probably close to the magnet would probably be a good spot for it. Kind of give me an idea of where the hole is going to be. Put that down. So once you drill your pilot hole, then you can drill your main hole. Build the hole out, and even though it's got a washer on the outside, I generally like to use a little RTV on the inside just as kind of an extra backup. I'm going to go tighten this down with socket. Pan back on, bolted in, got the cross member bolted back on. Hopefully everything's torqued to spec. And then I'm going to do the fill. There's 3 quarts left in this bottle. The Dodge uses the ATF +4, both in the power steering and the transmission. I already did the power steering fluid in another video, so that's where the 1 quart went. So we're going to start with the 3, and I'm going to empty what came out of the drain back into this bottle and kind of see where we're at. You can see that the new fluid is very red compared to the brown that was coming out of it. Alright, I recovered 4.5 quarts from the drain pan. So I've already added 4 quarts. One off camera, so I'm going to add another ½ quart, and then I'm going to get the car on level ground with the transmission at the right temperature and check it and get it the proper fill level. But this should be really close. I'm going to put the 4.5 back in. Alright, I did a little road test. Car's shifting okay. Tried both the manual shift and the automatic, from reverse to drive and drive to reverse and back and forth. the way the Dodge dipstick works, it has numbers from 20 to 120 on there. And you're supposed to know the temperature of the transmission to know what's the right fill level. The problem is it says without a special tool you can't know the exact transmission temperature, so I'm going to try to guesstimate. But it's shifting pretty well, so it's probably very close to the right fill level. The problem I'm having is it's hard to tell, is it filled at 40 or is it filled at 90 or somewhere between. The reason is when it comes out, it's got a solid fill right to 40, and then it kind of trickles a little bit all the way up to 90. See why transmission fluid is my least favorite thing to mess with. Because even on the Crown Victoria, where you've got a full and a low level, and you just check on the dipstick, it's still a messy job. It's kind of an all-day job, and I don't enjoy it. But it's one of those things that has to be done.